They called it their freedom date. For Alex and Sarah, May 31st, 2019, represented the finish line they'd been racing toward for nearly a decade. At 52 and 50 respectively, they were about to do what most of their friends and colleagues wouldn't attempt for another 15 years: retire completely from the workforce. The spreadsheet said it would work. Their financial advisor had given his cautious blessing. And the FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, had provided them with both a roadmap and a community of supporters who had supposedly done the same. Alex commemorated their final day of work with a photo. Sarah standing beside him in the parking lot of the tech company where they'd both worked for the last 7 years, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Financial Freedom Unlocked." They posted it to their retirement planning blog with the caption, "Day 1 of the rest of our lives." But what Alex and Sarah couldn't see in that moment of triumph was how quickly their carefully constructed early retirement would begin to unravel. Within 3 years, they would find themselves in a place they never imagined, updating resumes, scheduling interviews, and re-entering the workforce they had so confidently left behind. Their story isn't one of reckless spending or poor financial discipline. It's not about emergency medical disasters or unexpected family crises. It's the story of how even meticulous planning can fall short when confronted with the complex reality of early retirement. A reality that includes market volatility, persistent inflation, identity challenges, relationship strains, and the emotional weight of watching decades of savings slowly disappear. Today, we're sharing Alex and Sarah's journey, from the origins of their early retirement dream to the painful decision to return to work just 3 years later. Their experience offers valuable lessons about the mathematics of early retirement, the psychological challenges of leaving work decades before your peers, and the often overlooked risks that can derail even the most carefully constructed financial plans. Before they became early retirement enthusiasts, Alex and Sarah lived the kind of upper-middle-class life that looked successful from the outside, but felt increasingly hollow from within. They met in their late 20s while working at competing software companies in the Boston area. A chance encounter at an industry conference led to coffee, then dinner, then a relationship that would span decades. By their early 30s, they had married and relocated to the growing tech hub of Austin, Texas, drawn by the lower cost of living, absence of state income tax, and burgeoning technology sector. Their careers flourished in the Lone Star State. Alex's background in product development earned him a senior management position at a mid-sized software company, while Sarah's marketing expertise made her a valuable asset in the same firm when she joined 3 years later. Their combined income, approaching $235,000 by their mid-40s, allowed them to live comfortably in a 3,200 square foot home in a desirable suburb, take annual international vacations, and generally enjoy the fruits of their professional success. From all external appearances, they were living the American dream. But privately, both were beginning to question if the relentless pace of corporate life was worth the toll it was taking. "I remember the moment it hit me," Alex recalled during our interview. "I was sitting in a budget meeting, my third that day, and suddenly realized I'd been staring at the same PowerPoint slide for 5 minutes without absorbing a single word. I was completely burned out, but retirement seemed at least 15 or 20 years away." For Sarah, the wake-up call came after her father's unexpected death at 67, just 2 years into his own retirement. "Dad worked his entire life for a retirement he barely got to enjoy," she explained. "I kept thinking, what if that happens to us? What if we spend our entire lives working towards something we never get to experience?" These questions led them to explore alternatives to the traditional retirement path, eventually discovering the FIRE movement through online forums and financial independence blogs. The concept resonated immediately. Live significantly below your means, save and invest aggressively, and potentially retire decades earlier than the conventional age of 65 or 70. The math behind FIRE seems straightforward, built around what practitioners call the 4% rule. The theory that if you can live on 4% of your investment portfolio annually, adjusted for inflation, your money should last through a 30-year retirement. Working backward, this meant you needed approximately 25 times your annual expenses to reach financial independence. For Alex and Sarah, who determined they could live comfortably on $80,000 per year, the target was clear: $2 million in investment assets. Once they embraced this goal, their lifestyle underwent a dramatic transformation. The international vacations were replaced by camping trips and strategic credit card travel hacking. They downsized to a smaller home, cutting their mortgage by 40% and reducing property taxes and maintenance costs. They eliminated one car, cooked at home instead of dining out, and scrutinized every subscription and recurring expense. Their savings rate, previously around 15% of their income, soon approached 60%. It became a game, honestly, Sarah said. We'd challenge ourselves to see how much we could save each month without feeling deprived. We didn't see it as sacrifice. We saw it as buying our freedom. With dual incomes and no children, a conscious choice that aligned with both their personal preferences and financial goals, their net worth grew rapidly. Market gains during the extended bull run of the 2010s accelerated their progress. By early 2019, their investment portfolio had reached $2.1 million, exceeding their target and placing financial independence within reach several years earlier than they had initially projected. After careful consideration and multiple consultations with their financial advisor, they set their freedom date for May 31st, 2019. Alex was 52, Sarah just 50, decades younger than the typical American retiree. As their final day of work approached, they made what they believed were prudent preparations for their early retirement transition. They built a cash buffer of 18 months' living expenses to avoid selling investments during market downturns. They researched and purchased private health insurance to bridge the gap until Medicare eligibility. They diversified their portfolio across domestic and international indices, bonds, and real estate investment trusts. And they created detailed budgets and withdrawal strategies designed to make their nest egg last for potentially 40+ years. On paper, everything looked solid. But paper plans sometimes fail to capture the full complexity of real-world retirement. The first 6 months of early retirement felt like an extended vacation, exactly as Alex and Sarah had imagined. They traveled throughout the Southwest in their SUV, visiting national parks they had always planned to see someday. They spent weekdays at empty movie theaters and restaurants, reveling in the freedom of avoiding weekend crowds. They devoted time to hobbies long neglected during their demanding careers. Sarah rediscovered her passion for photography, while Alex began restoring a classic car he had purchased years earlier, but rarely had time to work on. It felt like we were getting away with something, Alex recalled with a smile. We'd see people rushing to work while we were heading out for a hike on a Tuesday morning, and we'd just look at each other and grin. The financial aspects of their retirement seemed equally positive during those early months. The market continued its upward trajectory, actually increasing their portfolio value despite their withdrawals. Their expenses came in slightly under budget, reinforcing their confidence in their financial projections. And the freedom from workplace stress translated into improved sleep, better health, and a sense of possibility that had been missing from their lives for years. But as their early retirement approached the 1-year mark, subtle challenges began to emerge, both financial and psychological. The first warning sign appeared in late 2019, when Sarah's mother experienced a health crisis that required significant family support. Although she had Medicare coverage, the out-of-pocket costs for her specialized care created financial strain that her modest savings couldn't fully absorb. Alex and Sarah found themselves covering several $1,000s of expenses, an act of family support they could hardly refuse, but one that hadn't factored into their retirement calculations. It wasn't a catastrophic amount, Sarah acknowledged, but it was a reminder that our budget didn't have much room for unexpected family needs. And with aging parents on both sides, we should have anticipated these costs better. This financial speed bump coincided with the first hints of relationship tension. After 2 decades in demanding careers that limited their time together, Alex and Sarah suddenly found themselves in each other's company nearly 24/7. Without the structure of work schedules and the built-in separateness of professional identities, they struggled to establish new rhythms and boundaries. Small irritations that had once been buffered by time apart now surfaced with increasing frequency. I discovered that Sarah has this habit of humming the same 3 notes when she's concentrating, Alex admitted. In all our years together, I'd never noticed it because we weren't around each other all day. Suddenly it was driving me crazy, which is ridiculous, but that's what happens when you're together constantly. Sarah had her own adjustments. Alex likes to process decisions out loud, talking through every possible option in excruciating detail, she explained. At work, he had teams and colleagues for that. In retirement, I became his sounding board for everything from what brand of olive oil to buy to whether we should rebalance our portfolio. These minor frictions might have resolved naturally given time, but they were soon overshadowed by a far more significant disruption: the arrival of the global pandemic in early 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic hit early retirees like Alex and Sarah in multiple ways, creating a perfect storm of financial and emotional challenges. Most immediately, it triggered a sharp market downturn that saw their carefully accumulated portfolio drop by nearly 30% in a matter of weeks. Although they had built a cash buffer specifically to avoid selling investments during market declines, watching over $600,000 in paper value evaporate was profoundly unsettling. Intellectually, we knew it was temporary, Alex explained. We'd been through downturns before, but there's something different about watching your portfolio plummet when you no longer have employment income coming in. It's like the safety net has disappeared. The pandemic also derailed their retirement lifestyle plans. The travel they had looked forward to became impossible overnight. Social activities and community engagement, which they had counted on to provide structure and connection in retirement, were suddenly unavailable. Their world, which had just expanded with freedom from work obligations, now contracted to the confines of their home. We went from having too many options to having almost none, Sarah recalled. Every day started to feel the same. We joked that we'd retired only to experience what felt like house arrest. As weeks of pandemic restrictions stretched into months, the psychological impact deepened. Both Alex and Sarah had derived significant purpose and identity from their professional roles. Without those anchors, and now without the compensatory activities they had planned for retirement, they struggled with questions of meaning and relevance. There's this weird limbo you enter in early retirement, Alex reflected. You're too young to identify with traditional retirees, but you're disconnected from the working world your peers still inhabit. The pandemic amplified that isolation exponentially. Sarah found herself particularly affected by this identity shift. I'd always been someone who worked. Since I was 16, I'd had a job, a team, deadlines, achievements. Suddenly I was just, a retired person. At 51, it didn't compute. As 2020 progressed, markets eventually recovered much of their lost value, providing some financial relief. But new concerns were emerging that would prove more persistent. The first was inflation, initially subtle, but increasingly evident in their monthly expenses. Grocery bills crept upward, utility costs increased. Their health insurance premiums rose by 12% at renewal, significantly outpacing the modest inflation adjustments they had built into their retirement budget. By early 2021, their annual expenses had increased from the projected $80,000 to nearly $88,000, a 10% rise that accelerated their portfolio withdrawals and potentially threatened the longevity of their savings. Simultaneously, another realization was dawning, one that many early retirees eventually confront, but few anticipate adequately. After 2 decades in technology roles, their skills and industry knowledge were beginning to depreciate rapidly. The tech sector changes incredibly fast, Sarah explained. Stay out for even a year, and you're behind on tools, methodologies, even vocabulary. After 18 months, I was reading industry news and encountering terms I didn't recognize. It was like watching my professional value erode in real time. This combination, rising expenses, pandemic restrictions, identity questions, and the awareness of diminishing professional relevance, created a growing sense of unease. Their early retirement, once a source of pride and liberation, was beginning to feel precarious and isolating. By their second retirement anniversary in mid-2021, Alex and Sarah found themselves having conversations they never expected to have, about whether leaving the workforce had been the right decision after all. It wasn't any single factor, Alex recalled. It was this accumulation of concerns, financial and emotional, that kept building until we couldn't ignore them anymore. The financial mathematics that had seemed so solid were showing signs of strain. Their original plan had been built around the 4% withdrawal rule, taking $80,000 annually from their $2 million portfolio with modest inflation adjustments over time. But this assumed a certain relationship between withdrawals, investment returns, and inflation that was no longer holding true. With inflation running higher than projected, and their expenses now exceeding $88,000 annually, their actual withdrawal rate had crept up to nearly 4.5%, a level many financial experts consider unsustainable for a retirement that might span 40-plus years. More concerning was what these numbers looked like projected forward. If inflation continued at elevated levels, they would need to withdraw incrementally larger amounts each year just to maintain their standard of living. Their portfolio, even if it achieved historical average returns, might not sustain these increasing withdrawals over multiple decades. We ran the simulations dozens of times, Sarah said, and the success rate kept dropping, from the 95% range when we first retired to below 75% with the new numbers. That's a 1 in 4 chance of running out of money before we die, not odds we were comfortable with. Beyond the financial calculations, the emotional and psychological aspects of their retirement were proving equally challenging. Despite their efforts to build new routines and find purpose beyond work, both were struggling with a sense of diminished contribution and relevance. There's this narrative in the FIRE community about finding your passion once you're financially independent, Alex observed. But the reality is more complicated. Not everyone has a passion project waiting in the wings, and even fulfilling hobbies don't necessarily provide the same sense of purpose that meaningful work can offer. For Sarah, the isolation had become particularly difficult to manage. Most of our friends were still working. They had limited availability and different daily rhythms. Our attempts to connect with other early retirees weren't particularly successful. Turns out there aren't many of us, and those we did meet often had very different backgrounds and interests. Their relationship, too, was showing signs of strain. Without the natural separation provided by work, and without the distractions of travel and social activities they had planned, they found themselves facing relationship dynamics they had never fully addressed during their working years. We had to have some hard conversations, Sarah admitted, about expectations, about space, about how we communicate. We realized we'd been so focused on the financial aspects of early retirement that we'd neglected to plan for the relationship aspects. By the fall of 2021, after a particularly difficult argument, about whether they should further reduce their spending, they reached a decision point. We were sitting on our patio, both feeling pretty miserable, Alex remembered. And Sarah just asked the question we'd both been avoiding. What if we went back to work? The question hung in the air between them, simultaneously liberating and defeating. On one hand, returning to work would mean admitting that their early retirement experiment had failed. A difficult acknowledgement for two achievement-oriented professionals who had publicly celebrated their financial independence. On the other hand, it offered a potential solution to both their financial concerns and their struggles with purpose and structure. After several weeks of intense discussion and soul-searching, they made their decision. They would return to the workforce, not necessarily to their former high-stress roles or income levels, but to positions that could provide both financial stability and meaningful engagement. Once we gave ourselves permission to consider it, there was almost a sense of relief, Sarah said. Like we'd been trying to force ourselves to enjoy something that wasn't actually working for us. But the decision to return to work was only the beginning of what would prove to be a challenging transition. Re-entering the workforce after early retirement presented obstacles that Alex and Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. The first and most obvious was explaining their employment gap to potential employers. How do you tell a hiring manager that you retired but changed your mind? Alex wondered. There's no checkbox for that on the application form. They decided on a strategy of selective honesty, acknowledging their time away from the workforce, while emphasizing their continued engagement with their industry through reading, online courses, and limited consulting projects. The latter, something they had done occasionally during retirement, though not extensively enough to generate significant income. The second challenge was technological. Despite their backgrounds in tech, they discovered that tools, platforms, and methodologies had evolved significantly during their absence. Terms like DevOps, agile transformation, and design thinking had moved from niche concepts to industry standards. Both invested in intensive online courses to update their skills, an unexpected expense and time commitment they hadn't factored into their return-to-work plan. Perhaps most significantly, they had to adjust their expectations about compensation and seniority. We knew we wouldn't step right back into the same level of roles we'd left, Sarah explained. But the reality of taking a significant step backward in terms of responsibility and salary was still harder than we expected. After approximately 4 months of job searching, a period marked by numerous rejections, several promising leads that didn't materialize, and moments of serious self-doubt, both secured positions that represented compromises but also opportunities. Alex joined a small software company as a senior product manager, a step down from his previous director-level position, but one that offered flexibility through a hybrid work arrangement and utilized his extensive experience. His salary of $110,000 was approximately 70% of what he had earned before retirement, but came with less stress and more reasonable expectations. Sarah found an opportunity as a marketing consultant for a healthcare technology firm, a contract position that offered 30 hours per week of predictable work with the potential for extension or conversion to full-time. Her annualized compensation of approximately $85,000 similarly represented a reduction from her pre-retirement earnings, but provided the balance she now knew she wanted. Together, their new positions would generate approximately $195,000 annually, significantly less than their peak earning years, but more than double what they had been withdrawing from their portfolio in retirement. This income would allow them to stop making withdrawals entirely, giving their investments time to recover and grow for their eventual second retirement, now replanned for their early to mid-60s. The transition back to working life brought both challenges and unexpected benefits. The structure of workdays, after nearly 3 years of complete schedule freedom, initially felt constraining. The accountability to managers and colleagues required an adjustment after answering only to themselves for so long. And the technology learning curve proved steeper than either had anticipated, creating moments of imposter syndrome neither had experienced since early in their careers. There were definitely days in those first few months when I wondered if we'd made another mistake, Alex admitted. I'd forgotten how exhausting it can be to be on professionally all day, especially in video meetings where you feel constantly observed. Yet alongside these challenges, both discovered unexpected rewards in their return to work. The social connections that had been missing in retirement quickly began to form with colleagues. The sense of accomplishment from completed projects and recognized contributions provided validation that had been absent during their retirement years. And perhaps most significantly, their relationship found a new equilibrium as they regained independent identities and experiences to share with each other. "We have things to talk about at dinner again," Sarah observed. "Challenges we're facing, people we're working with, goals we're pursuing. We have separate experiences during the day, which makes our time together feel more valuable and interesting." Financially, the impact of their return to work has been substantial. With their employment income covering their living expenses, they've been able to leave their investment portfolio untouched, allowing it to recover from both their earlier withdrawals and market fluctuations. Rather than seeing their net worth gradually decline as projected in retirement, they're once again watching it grow, rebuilding the security they'll need for their eventual second retirement. Now, 18 months after rejoining the workforce, Alex and Sarah view their early retirement experiment with a mixture of regret and gratitude. They regret some of the financial decisions that may have prematurely pushed them toward early retirement, particularly their failure to adequately account for inflation, healthcare costs, and family obligations in their projections. They regret not creating clearer structures and purposes for their retirement time before leaving their careers. And they regret the public nature of their retirement announcement, which made the decision to return to work feel slightly embarrassing, like an admission of failure. "We had a blog. We were active in FIRE forums," Alex explained. "We had positioned ourselves as people who had figured it out. Having to go back and essentially say, 'We were wrong,' that was humbling." But alongside these regrets, they expressed genuine gratitude for the experience and the lessons it taught them. "We learned more about ourselves in those 3 years than in the previous decade," Sarah reflected. "About what actually matters to us, about our relationship, about the role of work in creating meaning and identity. Those aren't lessons we could have learned without going through this." Today, they describe themselves not as failed early retirees, but as financially independent professionals. People who work by choice rather than necessity, seeking balance and meaning rather than maximum income. They've restructured their future plans around a concept they call semi-retirement, gradually reducing work hours as they age, potentially shifting to part-time roles or consulting arrangements in their 60s, and fully retiring only when it feels right both financially and emotionally. The irony is that we're probably happier and more financially secure now than if our early retirement had gone according to plan, Alex observed. "We have meaningful work that doesn't consume us, financial stability, and a much clearer understanding of what we actually want from this phase of our lives." Alex and Sarah's journey from early retirement back to the workforce offers valuable lessons for anyone considering a similar path, or anyone already on it and experiencing doubts. First, the 4% rule may be too aggressive for very long retirements. While this guideline has historical validity for traditional 30-year retirement periods, those retiring in their early 50s or younger may need to consider a more conservative withdrawal rate, perhaps 3% or even 2.5%, to ensure their savings can truly last for 40+ years. This adjustment dramatically changes the math of early retirement, potentially requiring significantly larger nest eggs than many FIRE enthusiasts calculate. Second, inflation must be taken seriously in long-term planning. Even modest inflation compounds dramatically over decades. An expense that costs $10,000 today would rise to over $24,000 in 30 years at just a 3% average inflation rate. And healthcare costs have historically risen much faster than general inflation. Early retirees need robust buffers against this erosive force, particularly since they face more decades of its impact. Third, the psychological aspects of early retirement deserve as much planning as the financial aspects. Identity, purpose, social connection, and partnership dynamics all undergo profound changes when leaving the workforce decades before peers. Without clear strategies for addressing these dimensions, financial independence alone may not deliver the fulfillment and satisfaction that early retirees seek. Fourth, maintaining some connection to your professional field, whether through part-time work, consulting, or ongoing education, preserves options that may prove valuable if circumstances change. Skills and networks depreciate rapidly in today's economy, making a complete and early exit from the workforce a potentially risky proposition if re-entry becomes necessary. Fifth, flexibility may be more valuable than rigid adherence to a specific retirement vision. The ability to adjust, working part-time, returning to work temporarily, or scaling spending up or down as needed, creates resilience that a binary work-retirement division doesn't allow. Many successful retirees now describe following a more fluid path of reducing work gradually rather than stopping completely. Perhaps most importantly, Alex and Sarah's experience highlights that there's no single right way to structure the second half of life. The traditional retirement model, working full-time until a specific age, then never working again, emerged in an era of shorter lifespans and more physically demanding jobs. With increased longevity and more knowledge-based work, a broader range of options has emerged, from early retirement to phased retirement to encore careers that combine purpose and income. I think our biggest mistake was treating retirement as the goal rather than the means, Sarah reflected. We were so focused on escaping work that we didn't think deeply enough about what we were moving toward. What would actually make this phase of life meaningful and sustainable? For Alex, the lesson was about balance and identity. Work isn't all or nothing. It's not either 60-hour weeks of stress or complete disengagement. There's this whole spectrum in between that we never really explored until our early retirement experiment didn't work out. Today, both describe having found a sweet spot, meaningful work at a sustainable pace, combined with the financial security to make choices based on values rather than necessity. They still hope to fully retire eventually, perhaps in their mid-60s, but with a clearer understanding of both the financial requirements and the non-financial elements that will make that retirement successful. If I could go back and give advice to my pre-retirement self, Alex said, I'd say focus less on the spreadsheets and more on the life you're building. The numbers matter, of course, but they're not the whole story. Sarah nodded in agreement. And I'd add, be careful about making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. We left work largely because we were burned out, not because we thought deeply about what retirement at 50 would actually be like. Their journey, from high-powered careers to early retirement to a more balanced working life, reflects a broader evolution in how Americans are approaching the second half of adulthood. Rather than a single transition from full-time work to full-time leisure, many are creating customized pathways that blend work, learning, service, family time, and personal pursuits in varying proportions across decades. This more fluid approach recognizes that our needs, priorities, and circumstances evolve over time, and that the best plan is one that can evolve with them. For those currently considering early retirement, Alex and Sarah offer this final reflection. Ask yourself what you're retiring to, not just what you're retiring from, and build flexibility into your plan, because one thing we can guarantee is that life will surprise you, financially, emotionally, and in ways you can't even imagine. If this story helped you, give it a like and subscribe to Goldprint, Stories of Life After the Paycheck. We share true retirement stories every week. Let us know in the comments. Would you consider returning to work if you had to? Your insight might help someone else.